And you can see why this is important in a push hand situation, but let's talk a little bit about why it's important in solo form training. As we talked about in this picture, when the weight shifts forward, that tends to cause the person, they'll be standing like this, and as they shift their weight forward, this happens. And what happens here is the knee starts to bend and it starts to push forward. So the knee is moving forward and the leg is basically angled like that. And the upper leg is going to be up here. And so what happens is the knee is brought forward so that the body can be lined up over this spot. And right now it's not a problem. The knee is still behind the toe, but it's really close to that line. And as this person, if they're trying to keep their weight over this spot and their body's now lined up here, their center of gravity's moved forward, and it's all lined up over this spot on the foot, what happens is as they bend their knee further, if they're sinking into a lower stance or whatever, and they're trying to keep their weight here, the knee's going to have to continue to push forward. And so it's a lot more likely to go out past the toe to keep their center of gravity over this spot on the foot than it would be if their center of gravity was over this spot on the foot. Because as you can see with the center of gravity lined up here, if they bend their knee, they have this much space to go through all the way up to here before they get to the toe. So they have a lot of space that knee can move if they're keeping their center of gravity here. But if they shift their center of gravity forward, now all they have is that much space before they start to go out past the toe. So standing with your weight shifted forward to the ball of the foot is going to put your knees in a position where it's much more likely for you to do unsafe things with them. And you'll notice as you shift your weight forward that your knees, this whole area here starts to tense up because they're trying to hold your body weight here. And instead of having a good frame supporting that, what's happening is the weight's coming down and getting stuck here in the knees. That's basically holding the weight over this empty spot rather than holding the weight right above a bone that's meant to transfer that force down into the ground. So when you're practicing your solo forms, having your weight out here is going to put your knees in a lot more precarious positions a lot more often. But it affects your stability even in other ways. So let's go back to these guys and let's pretend that they're not doing push hands. He's practicing a solo form and he just happens to be in this stance. Now I kind of wish that his right leg here was the one that was bent because it would be easier to see what I'm talking about in this picture. But we're going to say, okay, so his leg is coming here and we're going to say his knee's somewhere around here, right? On the back leg. So this leg back here, we're going to say that the knee is somewhere there. Now, if he has his weight forward here, what happens when the force is coming down is that instead of getting directed back in a supported way through that shin bone, it's getting directed this way. So it's not lined up with what the anatomical structure of the leg's doing. It's lined up with basically empty space, which means he's going to have to tighten up his quad on his left side here, coming up this way, and his knee is going to be bearing the brunt of this force coming in from the upper body. So this is where the force is being focused, and it's causing a lot more strain here, and then the calf is having to tense up, the foot is having to push harder into the floor, and there's no direct line of force to help this knee out. It's just fighting on its own basically right here. And this is another way in which putting your weight forward toward the ball of the foot really puts more strain on the knee than is necessary. And we can see here that in his stance, his knee is beyond his toe. And with the weight shifted forward, we just talked about how that's a problem. So let's talk about why it's not a problem if his weight is shifted where it's supposed to be. And in a back stance like this, there's not really any way getting around the knee being ahead of the toe. But there's a safe way to do it, and there is a not safe way to do it. Weight shifted to the ball of the foot is the not safe way to do it for this reason. So now let's say he's directing his force down directly below his tibia, through the talus, straight through the foot, into the floor. That's where the focus of the force is going. Why is that easier on his knee? And the reason is because as the force of gravity is pulling down on him through his body this way, and that force is coming down toward the knee, what he does with that force is not direct it here and then push it back this way toward empty space where there's no bone to support it. He pushes straight along the tibia into the floor. So now there's support along these lines of force. And it's important to note when you're in a stance like this, your weight is not doing, or your force through your leg, the back leg, this bent leg here, it's not doing this, okay? That's not what your force is doing into the ground. What your force is doing is coming down into the knee and then you're pushing that back. So there's a directional force back from the knee. It feels more like the force you would feel if you were stepping up on something. So the leg is pushing back this way, as if we were to take his leg and bring it up in front of him in that same posture. He could set it on a step and push down and bring himself up. He's pushing back and down this way. So that's what allows his knee to withstand the force of his body here, even though it's out past the toe. It's because the force is going back this way. It's not going down this way. So as we can see, using this weight distribution, or this focus of your body's weight into your feet, is even helpful when you're doing solo forms. It's not just helpful when you're doing partner practice. So it keeps your knee safer, and then also keeps your balance a little bit more easy for you to control. So earlier I said that we would talk a little bit about the Yongchuan point, or that bubbling well kidney 1 point on the bottom of the foot. And we're going to discuss that now, because there are a lot of practitioners that think that the weight needs to be centered over that point. And that's important for energy flow through the body. It's important for good structure, all of that. Well, we've talked really kind of extensively about why having your weight centered there is a bad idea for solo practice and for partner practice. But let's talk a little bit about why there's this idea that your weight should be there in the first place. So the first thing that we need to discuss is where this point is located. Here's this is the ball of their foot here. There's a sort of a V shape that it creates here and here. And that's kind of hard to tell in this picture exactly where this is on their foot, but kind of where the ball of the foot comes in to a point here is generally the area that's accepted for where the Yongchuan point, or the kidney 1 point, is on the bottom of the foot. There's other ways of finding it. One is to pretend that my hand is a foot, and I curl my toes in the spot where all the skin kind of scrunches down into a point right there. If this person were to curl their toes in, you would see kind of an indentation there. That's another way you can locate it. Another way of locating it is saying you go 2/3 of the way from the back of the foot toward the front, and just laterally to midline is typically where you find that point. So that's the point that we're talking about on the bottom of the foot. And this point is considered very important for energy connection to the ground. And it's believed that through this point you can connect to the earth's energy, and you can basically draw energy from the earth through this point in your foot. And whether you believe that or not, this is kind of the idea behind this point in Tai Chi training. What's happened though is it's moved from this idea of being an energy point, a place of drawing energy from the earth and connecting energetically with your root into the ground, to the place where you want to center your center of gravity. You want to put your body's weight over this point. And these are two very different concepts that have sort of melded together into this idea that you want your weight centered here and also draw energy from here. For the energetic side of Tai Chi, yes, this is a point where you want to focus. This is a point that you want to open. And this is a point that you will feel energy moving through. And it's definitely a point where you feel a root connection to the ground. That's all true at this point. But anatomically, that's not where you want your weight, as I've said many times before. So one thing that you will see in classical Tai Chi writing is that you want this spot hollow and not necessarily pressing into the ground or bearing your weight. You want this sort of drawing up. And that's quite different from the idea of shifting all of your weight to this. So given that this point is something that's discussed quite a bit in Taiji practice, and it does have a role to play, let's talk a little bit about the role of this point in the foot, since the role is definitely not weight-bearing of the foot. So one of the important points that the Yongchuan point plays in Taiji